Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Kurdistan Connection on Medya News with myself, Matt Broomfield. I'm really looking forward to today's discussion because normally the guests that we have on this show are more political figures from Europe or from Kurdistan or from elsewhere in the Middle East, offering analysis on what's happening in the region and how it relates to broader global issues. But of course, politics is not the only way that Kurdistan plays a role in broader global affairs. And I'm very happy to welcome today a guest from the literary world, Burhan Sönmez, who some of you will likely be familiar with, as he is a very prominent representative of Kurdish letters. Burhan was Kurdish, born in Turkey, and has lived for many years in my home country, the UK. He has published 6 novels, or what will be 6 novels, which we'll discuss today, 5 of which have been written in Turkish, and his forthcoming novel will initially be published in his mother tongue, Kurdish. And as well as that, Burhan is a human rights lawyer and an advocate for the rights of intellectuals, of writers, and of literary exchange, in which capacity he serves as the president of PEN International. So Burhan, welcome to B'Khair Hatib.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Matt. Great to meet you.
Yeah, I'm very glad to have you here today. So I thought, we could begin with a little discussion about your forthcoming work, and then we will broaden the conversation a bit to speak about some of the more political aspects of your work and your work with PEN. But yes, as we've mentioned, you're about to publish a novel which will be written in Kurdish. Perhaps you could briefly introduce the novel and say why this was the book that you chose to write in your mother tongue.
Yes, the book now is being translated into English and will be available to English-speaking readers in January 2025. It's been published in Turkey in Kurdish and then in Turkish a couple of months ago. This is the story of Franz Kafka, and mainly story of a youngsters group in 1968 in Paris and West Berlin. Those youngsters who are activists and also in love with literature, especially with Franz Kafka, they have many questions. They are not only in chase of former Nazi officers. They are also defenders of dead writers. They say that when writers die, who are going to defend them? They say that we are the readers, we are the only people who can defend them. And then they decide to punish who have been disloyal to dead writers. That's interesting discussion at the time. And then the story begins.
So I guess what I want to ask is, first you had the idea for this novel, and then you said this novel addressing Kafka and addressing these issues should be written in Kurdish. You were like, I'm going to write in Kurdish, and then the novel began. Like, how did this develop?
It was a long process because I had this dream of writing a novel in Kurdish for a long time, but I didn't know that which book I should start with because there were so many projects in my hand, so many works, so many files. And at some point, when I started to think about this novel, especially Lovers of Franz K, and I had an idea, feeling, saying that I could write this book in Turkish or Kurdish, whichever I like, or even in English. But then I said, this is the time to return home. My home is Kurdish language. So this was the good time for my own feeling. Then I wrote the book in Kurdish.
Yeah, I was wondering a bit. It's like, the K, Franz K, Joseph K, and maybe there's also a small Kurdish link there. I don't know.
Yeah.
If this crossed your mind. And so you were reading Kafka as you developed this novel, and how did your reading of Kafka influence the writing of this novel, and maybe particularly with reference to the language?
There are some turning points when you read a book or think about something. And this idea came to me about 13, 14 years ago. I was reading a book by a French philosopher, not in the book itself, but in one of footnote. There was a single sentence mentioning French partisans during the Second World War. They were fighting against Nazis. At the same time, they were publishing an underground magazine of culture and art. And I found that very interesting. You are fighting, you're about to die in a war, but you are publishing an underground cultural magazine. But moreover, the thing I found interesting, they had discussion about Kafka. At some point, they asked the question, should we burn Kafka? I didn't know the framework of that question, whether to rescue him, uh, because Kafka didn't want to be published when he was about to die. He left his will in two different written texts, making it clear that he wanted everything he left behind should be burned by his friend Max Brod. But Max Brod that did the opposite and published all of his manuscripts. And that discussion in that Partisans underground cultural magazine struck something in my mind. I said, wow, that's a point, okay, to think about and to form a question and a story. Of course, it took me about 10 years to bring it to a framework of a full story.
So I suppose if we're speaking about Kafka's inheritance, of course, he's kind of normally seen, I suppose, as a voice of despair, writing at a desperate time in a desperate way. By placing him in 1968 or his ideas in 1968, do you feel you could find some new perspective or new kind of political application for Kafka?
Yes, because Kafka and the big literature usually can be understood in tension. The tension, I mean, 1968, an example, and the movement of youth at the time was an example, and the time of Cold War, and the world and the Europe was divided in the middle, like East and West. So many different lines existed at the time, and I thought that it would be a good moment to place Kafka there. And also one of the reasons was that 1968, the year that Max Brod died in December. So I said this story should be shaped around in his final year, because in that year also he paid a visit to West Berlin after many decades. I said, okay, let's use his last year and his visit to West Berlin and this uprising in Paris, Istanbul, and West Berlin, and create my own world for Kafka and Max Brod.
And maybe then as a last question on this book, was there something that you hoped to say or that you found yourself thinking about contemporary political culture in Europe as a result?
Yes, because this is not just simply a question of history. The same thing happening today. 2 months ago, just after I published my book in Kurdish, something interesting happened. Gabriel Garcia Marquez's new book was published called Until August. He passed away 10 years ago. When he died, he had a manuscript and he told his two sons that this manuscript is not mature enough to be published and they should never publish it. But his sons decided to publish after 10 years. Now, what is the right thing? What is the wrong thing? This is a question. Okay, we can say that this is very controversial point. But other thing is still that writers or the text of that people should be treated in a fair way. Another question, for example, are we allowed to change the text of dead writers? my question is, in the UK, for example, Roald Dahl's books have been published, kind of cleared of bad words, with the eyes of political correctness. What is the limit of this? Who is going to make decision while all readers are here waiting? Don't we trust the mind of reader who is critical, who has a broad mind to see the right and wrong in a book that's written 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago? If we decide to correct all texts, written in the past, that would mean that in every decade we have, because in every decade the concept of human changes. People always develop new terminology, new politics. So this is another question now in publishing world, in literary world. And that's why when I wrote that book, I didn't think that it would talk about the past, but actually it's talking about today and tomorrow.
Yeah, and maybe that then also correlates to the question of writing it in Kurdish now, and I suppose questions of censorship, and which voices can come to us from the past, and which are kept out. Actually, yes, I wanted to ask, kind of for you, yes, so you began this project, you decided to write this work in Kurdish, and kind of how did it feel? Was the process different to when you were writing in Turkish? Did something unexpected happen as you put the pen to the paper, or it was natural?
And it was not natural, because my main language has been Turkish, because Kurdish was limited to our oral discussion life in Turkey. I was born in a small village, then we moved to town, but we never saw a printed Kurdish text, a book or a magazine. We never heard anything on TV or radio in Kurdish. Now, in last 10, 15 years, we can see that kind of things, because now there's internet, there is social media. But when I was not only a child, when I was a young man, it was impossible to see that kind of thing. So the education we were given was only in Turkish, and Turkish became my main language. Now, returning from an oral Kurdish language to a written Kurdish language was a challenge, because you have to adapt a new way of grammar. In daily oral language, grammar is totally free. There is not any rule, but for written language is totally different. And also for Kurdish, for Kurmanji in northern Kurdistan, is further a problem, because we haven't got a history of a standard Kurdishness yet. In last a few decades, thanks to our writers and intellectuals, they've been building a wonderful common Kurmanji that we could all use. But still, the influence of dialects and different, let's say, local sounds are very much available around. So it was a challenge for myself. What should I adapt? The generally now being accepted standard Kurdishness, or the Kurdish accent of my region? In many aspects, they are totally different. Still, this is a question I think in my next novels, I will always struggle with this one, and trying to bring my own accent more into standard Kurdish grammar now.
Yeah. Where are you from, if I can ask?
I'm from central Anatolia, Haymana, near between Ankara and Konya. So we are not from Kurdistan. We've been in Anatolia for 500 years. So many things changed since then.
Yes. I would also just mention now for the listeners, a project which I'm still kind of gobsmacked by, which is the recent translation into Kurdish of Joyce's Ulysses by Kawa Namir, which I'm sure you've also seen, and which I know kind of also involved an extremely exhaustive process of searching for all kind of possible oral reference points, culture, language, phrases, in order to kind of take this step forward in Kurdish literature, which I would encourage people to seek out if they're interested in.
I think Kawa Nemer's attempt to translate Ulysses into Kurdish. Uh, it's not just matter of translation. It's a revolution in language. It is something being done not for today, for the future, certainly.
Yes. But so, and I suppose in terms of your work, albeit this is the first work that you've written in Kurmanji and Kurdish, what kind of role has the Kurdish language, Kurdish culture, Kurdish folklore played in your previous work that you've written in Turkish?
Yes, always, even though I've written, or my generation writers writing in Turkish, we cannot say that it's a pure Turkish, because we try, or we are not try, it comes naturally. We put our spirit, our soul, our denied culture into that written text, even though it's in a different language, like Kurdish, so Turkish or English, whatever it is. But since Kurdish culture and language has been denied and forbidden, and we try to find ways to recreate it in different shapes, in different voices. So when I wrote my previous 5 novels in Turkish, um, mostly I try to reflect my own identity, my own experiences, my past, and of course my worldview. That means that mainly shaped around Kurdish culture, my time in my small Kurdish village, and the problems of the political and sociological problems of today around Kurdish issue. It is not something that anyone can deny. So this naturally become part of my writing.
Of course. And yeah, maybe a final question on this kind of Kurdish aspect of the work. So you're publishing now this work in Turkey. Do you expect there to be a negative reaction from the Turkish literary establishment, a positive one? How will people think about this publication coming out in Kurdish, and is it kind of joining other work that's being published in Kurdish in Turkey today?
Yeah, that's interesting. Not surprising, but interesting. People mostly telling me, why am I trying to write in Kurdish? By saying this, they mean that it's an unimportant language. Okay, it has no importance, especially in international literary world, because I live in Britain. My language English here. I teach in English and I work in English. People expect me to write a book in English rather than return to a small language like Kurdish, in shadow. People say, "Oh, you are ruining your own career." Okay, yeah, this is a wrong turn, for a writer. But they don't understand that in literature, there is not a good or bad language. There is a good or bad story. Okay, it's the way you use the language important. It's either English or Kurdish or any other language. So, and this is the general thing, we can say about languages. But on the other side, there is a personal level for me and for people like me, because we are orphans. We have been cut off from our mother tongue. As soon as we were born, we were told that this is a forbidden language. At school, we were beaten by teacher, and then in every part of life, in hospital, in courtyard, when you were arrested, your language was denied and it was told into your face, and you had a life of exile in your own home, in your own country. Now it's time for me, for people like me, to return home, to return from exile and to say that this is my language. And now I have opportunity to use it, to raise it, to show it to everyone. This is something also uh, satisfy me, makes me happy, makes me, sleep better at night.
Mhm. Yeah, and this is also important, of course. And it, so yeah, as well as being a writer in your own right, you're also chair of PEN International, which is a body and institution which has a rich history of a century of bringing together writers, translators, poets, authors from many cultures and many traditions across the globe, particularly in the face of political repression. Maybe first you could say something about what kind of efforts you've been able to make for Kurdish literature through PEN, and yeah, maybe also more broadly, how are you working at the moment to bring together Kurdish voices, Palestinian voices, and other voices shut out from the mainstream literary establishment that you touched upon earlier?
Thank you, Matt. PAN International is an organization of 100 years old. Uh, Many writers, and by many actually, we should say 40,000 writers are working with this organization. We have about 130 centers in different countries. Our focus is freedom of expression. That means that freedom of writers, to help writers at risk in difficult situations. And the world we live in at the moment, unfortunately, is not a stable place. Every year we see a new crisis, a new conflict comes up. Now we see this, okay, Kurdish issue, my own issue, because I come from that region. Now, and the thing is going on in Palestine, in Gaza, and the things going in Ukraine, and before that, the things happened in Afghanistan when Taliban came to power, or military coup in Myanmar, the things going on in Eritrea, in Yemen, all over the world. Um, these kind of problems never stop. That means that we need to work. People, writers, journalists, we have to work to defend our colleagues, our fellow writers, and to give them opportunity to speak and to write, as they wish. And we have so many different subgroups, subcommittees within organization, not only pen centers. For example, this week, our translation and linguistic right committees gathering in Finland. Many colleagues and fellow writers gathering there now. And our focus, for example, in that committee is about translation and linguistic rights. That means that denied cultures and languages are given more opportunity, or we are trying to support them in different ways. And Kurdish language, or Palestinian literature, or people from um, uh, different countries in Africa or in Latin America, they need more attention, and we are trying to do our best.
And yeah, maybe I suppose to sort of bring these sort of two sides of your work and what you do together, by way of a final question. In that you've been working with PEN for some time now, and I suppose you've had the opportunity to meet with many writers from many traditions, many countries, to discuss your work and the challenges you face together. And has this kind of made an impact on how you choose to work, how you choose to write yourself?
No, it didn't affect me at all, but it made something clear in my mind. Because in the beginning, when my books were being translated into other languages, I had a question for myself. I said, how people are going to feel about my book, because I'm someone from Turkey. I'm writing about the thing that shaped around my identity and my personality. But this book now will be read in India, um, in Ethiopia, or in Serbia, or in Germany. And after a couple of years, when I started to travel for my books in different countries, I realized that every reader, asking same thing. They have similar mind, and there is no division between readers anymore. That's the thing that I observed myself, and I felt happy. There is a global readership at the moment. So I said, I will write whatever I like, and people will read it with their own eye in Turkey or in Britain or in another country.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure and privilege to have you on the show today and to hear some of the important work you're doing. The book we've been discussing today is called Evindaren Joseph K, The Lovers of Joseph K, and we will add a link as well. So if listeners, readers would like to purchase it, they can, and also to support the work of Pen International. Burhan, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you. This has
been the Kurdistan Connection with myself, Matt Broomfield. Until the next program, thank you and goodbye.